And so one of the things that I see when I talk to people is they think they need to be the person who fulfills on this dream now, before they start. And it's really backwards. Because like Les Brown talked about, we become who we are capable of becoming in pursuit of this dream. And a guy by the name of Michael Beckwith has a quote which I really like. He says, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And one of the, I think, powerful stories of that is in the Bible. And I'm going to reference a lot of different like spiritual texts today. I don't consider myself any particular type of denomination. You know, I wear my Jewish star, and it's not because it's Jewish. It has a particular meaning to me, and I have my Sanskrit bracelet and my astrological sign on my ring. So, but in the Bible, you know, God calls Moses, and he says, hey, I need you to go free the Jews from slavery. And Moses is like, I'm just a shepherd. And, you know, God doesn't say this in the Bible, but you can imagine God says, that's okay, you'll become Moses in the process. Because, you know, Steve Jobs didn't start out as like this icon that we see. How many of you have seen the Steve Jobs movie or read the biography? Right? Like, he's just a guy. He was a guy with fears and concerns and worries and challenges, but he just worked through it. And in that process, because he had this dream that was pulling him forward in life so that he'd overcome all the challenges, he became this icon. The same thing with Martin Luther King. Like, if you read about Martin Luther King when he was younger, he was an interesting young man, but we're all interesting young men and women. But he had this dream around the civil rights movement, right? I mean, he had a dream. And so he became Martin Luther King in the process. And the same thing with Gandhi. If you read the autobiography of Gandhi, which is an accomplishment in and of itself, because the thing's like 1,000 pages, but it's an extraordinary autobiography. And, you know, Gandhi shares like his challenges with what's right and what's wrong, and he looks at his relationship with women and should I eat meat? I mean, he struggled with the same stuff that we struggle with. But he wanted a free and independent India. And so he became Gandhi. And the thing is that's not just reserved for Steve Jobs and Martin Luther King and Gandhi. They became these great people because they went and fulfilled on their dream. And a lot of people talk about going and trying to find like, I got to go find my purpose, or I got to go, like, figure something out. And my experience is that it's in you. It's in you already, right? So part of what we're going to talk about here today is what prevents, ultimately, what we want to bring into the world, because I think we all have this unique gift that is meant for us to bring into this world that's extraordinary, and what prevents us from letting that out. So what I've experienced in my life, and what I see in talking to a lot of people, whether it's friends or coworkers or employees or family members, is that at some point along the way we get confused and we misunderstand who we are. We start building this false sense of self around all the stories and all the labels and all the things, and we start living our life that way. And we get confused about how life works, how we interact with life. And we start living much smaller than we really are. And so we start giving ourselves away. I remember when I was young, what I wanted to do, I always wanted to take interesting concepts and present them in a beautiful creative format. That's what I wanted to do. And for me, when I was a kid, that was making movies. And I remember sharing with the career counselor and sharing with my dad and sharing with other people that I wanted to make movies. And the feedback was always the same. It was like, well, you can't really make a living doing that. It's like 1 in a million. And so as a young person, I was like, oh, okay, well, like, I don't want to do something that's 1 in a million that I can't really make money at. So then I got into advertising. And then from advertising, I got into working in the internet. And I got further and further away from like what was my authentic self-expression. And what I see is that we do that. We give ourselves away because we don't know any better as young people. It's like when your parent tells you something or a career counselor tells you something, you just sort of believe it. And so when we do that, we start to move away from our dreams. We start to give up on this beautiful thing that we're here to give birth to in the world, and then we get stuck because we don't have that dream in front of us anymore that allows us to overcome all the challenges in life, right? That pulls us into it. That's the thing that allows us to grow. And we get stuck. And so I talk to a lot of people in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, where they say, yeah, I just feel stuck. Like, this isn't the life that I imagine living when I was younger, and I still have this vision of like how I could be living my life now, and it's not how I'm living life, and I don't really know how to bridge that gap. And that's this misalignment, and that's when we suffer. So that's what we're going to talk about here today, is we're going to talk about like what happens that causes this, and then what we can do to get unstuck in our lives. And when we talk about the dream, I like to use the dream as the centerpiece of this conversation, but it could be anything. You could be talking about how you've been wanting to lose 15 pounds for the last 5 years, how you should exercise more. There's something going on with you that you're not aware of that's a blind spot where you're not doing it. You know, or you keep saying, you know what I'd really like to do? I'd really like to work with kids. You go, okay, well, are you? No. Well, why not? Well, because I have my job. All right, it's very reasonable. But ultimately what happens is it contributes to that stuck feeling. Right, I appreciate that. And you talked about what happened, and you started to get into, then we can create a new story, right? And the question is not whether or not we get through these things. It's just like, how much do we want to struggle through it, and how much time does it take? Like most of the things we get through in our life, but while we're spending time getting through those things, we're not, what I call in this seminar, living our dream. We're not working on that expression of our authentic self, that gift, that idea that we have to bring into the world. We're spending all of our time over here on this stuff, being stuck. And so, Jesse went some period of time that he told himself that story, because we're not aware of when we're telling ourselves a story. Like we're in the story, it's real for us. So Jesse's story sounded something like, how did I get here? This wasn't where I wanted to be. I'm broke. I'm broken. Look at other people. This is, et cetera, et cetera. And then now looking back, he can say, well, this is what happened. What happened is I was unprepared and I was going through life experiences. And if we want to, now we can actually create an empowering story of what happened. What we'd like to do is we'd like to do it kind of when the story's happening, right? But you could create an empowering story. What would an empowering story look like about your experiences? If you were telling the story of a hero, right, who emerged, and this was the turning point in his life, like what does that story look like? It's very different, right? It's, I face challenges and I overcome them and I can handle whatever comes up for me in my life, and I know that I'm resourceful and I've made it this far. If I've made it this far, I can make it that far. These things always come up. But I know I can overcome them, because that's who I know myself to be. And that's the empowering story. Now, here's what's interesting. When we have an experience, we know that what happens, we collect the experience with our senses, and that wires our brain, because we store the memory of that present moment experience anatomically, right? We see that these synapses connect with neurons to represent what we're experiencing. So, and that happens in the present moment. And then what the brain does is, in the future, it goes back and looks at the present moment and it grabs whatever memories it has and it brings it back to interpret this moment. So if we, in the moment, or recognize soon that we're in a story from the past that probably wasn't true anyway, and we create that new story now, what happens? Our brain records that experience. Jesse experiences himself of being the hero of his life and being unstoppable and being able to face challenges. Life is tough, but I keep getting back up. And that's how it's always been. It's how it's always been for all of us. Like, nobody's laying down here. I don't know where Eddie went. I thought you just ascended. So we create that memory. Well, what happens in the future when we come up against the next thing? When Jesse has a challenge? It grabs that empowering story that we created. That's how we rewire our brains. We're going to talk about that in a minute with neuroplasticity. And that's that idea of affirmations. People say, well, say positive things. Well, positive things to myself, does that really do anything? Yes! That's what it does. Because you're creating an experience now that you're storing that you have access to in the future. You're changing your future right now by doing that. And, well, you can, right? But what happens is you leave the seminar and then you get caught up in your story again, and life's too busy and I don't have enough time and there's not enough. So you have to develop a practice of this. It's a skill. It's like anything else. If you want to play in the major leagues of giving birth to your dreams, then you got to practice it. In most of our lives, we've been practicing something different. And there are these frameworks for practicing it. This is what's so cool. And I'm trying to bring it all together so everybody doesn't have to go study every framework that's out there. And so there's a process that I work through, which I'm going to read to you, and we won't do because everybody's hungry. I think it's really valuable to do, so maybe we'll knock it out right after lunch if we can like stay in this zone and come back to it. But I call it the ego self reeducation process. So when I notice a negative feeling, I then listen to the voice in my head. And a lot of times this happens for me in the morning. I think what happens is that while I'm asleep, I'm actually not as conscious, so I can't work with my unconscious egoic mind like I do throughout the day. So I wake up feeling anxious. Does anybody else wake up feeling anxious? Okay. So I wake up feeling anxious. So I notice the feeling, and then I get right on my computer in the morning. I have a morning routine, and I type out everything that I hear. All of it, the whole story. And then I work my process around it, similar to what we did with the stories and the limiting beliefs. And then I end up feeling better. That's my process. So I'll read it to you real quick and then we'll break for lunch because I brought an example of it. This is what I woke up to on Tuesday. I'm just not going to get it done. There's simply not enough time. The presentation isn't smooth and nobody's going to understand it. It's too much information crowded into too little time. This is going to be embarrassing. Everyone is expecting this to be compelling information and they're giving their Saturday up for this and you're not delivering. You should back out. But there's not a way to back out. I feel trapped. I don't have time today to get my meetings done and my iPhone repaired and finish this presentation. Carol isn't even going to be here tomorrow or Friday to help me practice. I haven't even practiced the second half yet. I'm not even finished with my notes or the handouts. This is a disaster. That's what I woke up to. Good morning. But like, you ever wake up like this?
Yeah.
Right? But we are a vehicle for the expression of universal consciousness or higher power or God to come into the world and create. That's what we're here to do. We're creators. And when you start to get this perspective, everything else you go and read makes sense, and none of it made sense before. Because what are we made in the image of? This higher power. What does it do? It created us. Okay, so we're in the image of it, we create. That's what we do. We are a channel for it to express into the world. And I use the word powerful for the Powerful Living Seminar. And I had to come up with a name for the seminar because you see it on a flyer somewhere and it's like, live your life and don't be stressed out anymore or overcome the challenges that you're having in your life. I can't be like, hey, come to the seminar and discover that you're consciousness itself. I mean, you can. Some people will show up. But like, I want to bring this work to everybody. Because when you understand this, it transforms your life. Because things like fear and worry and anxiety make no sense. I mean, when you wake up as the creative power of the universe and you understand your expression for that on a daily basis, you're not worried about what your boss thought. You're like, how do I go express myself? That's what I'm here to do. So I use this word powerful. Well, what does it mean? And we started talking about this a little bit at the beginning. So what do you think the Powerful Living Seminar is? So we all have definitions of powerful. Anybody want to share what their definition is? Somebody must share their definition. What is it?
Fearless.
Fearless. Okay. Anybody else have another definition?
Strength.
Strength. Great. Anything else? Courageous. Fearless, courageous, strength. Any others?
Having possibilities.
Having possibilities. Great. Unlimited.
Having a strong effect.
Having strong effect. Strong. So we all have these different definitions, right? It's interesting because we have these words and we all use them differently, and then we all use them in conversation, but you mean something different than what I mean, and then we converse around it. For me, there's only one powerful. All of these are all effects of powerful. And that is living life expressed full of the power. That's it. That's it. It's living life as my true self-expression, not in the space of ego, not in my stories, not in my limiting beliefs, bringing my dream into the world on as much of a consistent basis as possible. That's powerful. That may manifest as all the things we describe as powerful, but that's it. It's full of the power of life itself. It's full of higher power, of spirit, of consciousness, of awareness, of God, Allah, whatever you want to call it. That's powerful. I ask this question a lot. And if you have stories that pop up because we start referencing things in religion, just be aware of it. Because that's how we've been conditioned over time. This is not going to turn into a sermon. It may feel like it, but Carol and I were on the airplane and we were going over the presentation and this guy sitting next to me goes, "Are you a preacher?" And I go, "Yeah, I guess kind of. Yeah, a little bit." He goes, "Well, I love your word." I said, "Okay, well, thanks." I find that there's this different answer to this question, but it's really always the same answer. Who's the most powerful person in history? There's no right or wrong answer.
Jesus.
Jesus. Why?
Because, I mean, ramifications, I think this is probably more for a Western world, right? But, the ramifications of his teaching and what he's done have, they're widespread. And,
He conquered death by death.
Than anybody else, maybe?
Maybe. We start to get into the same way we were defining power before.
Yeah.
Because he lived full of the power. That's why he's the most powerful person. He was the physical embodiment and expression and vehicle and channel for that which we are. But he just lived an ego less. So he was powerful. He's one of those powerful people. And, you talk to a Buddhist and it's Buddha, and you talk to somebody else, it's whoever their guy was in their tribe, that represented and then went out and taught, this is who you are. This is a very important piece as we get into the second part of the seminar, because if we keep living our lives as David, who should have started an internet marketing business and sold it for $100 million and didn't, who's 6'8" and gets asked by little ladies all the time how tall I am, and whatever. Right? Like, I'm living that, and I'm not being this thing that I really am, which is extraordinarily powerful.